I never thought my suburban life could feel like a soap opera, but here we are. Let me start from the beginning. My husband, Chris, 34M, and I, 31F, have been married for 5 years. We have a comfortable, quiet life in a nice neighborhood with friendly neighbors, a cozy house, and a dog named Max. I thought we had escaped any major drama. That is, until Rachel, 32F, moved in. Rachel is Chris's ex-girlfriend, and not just any ex, the ex. The one who broke his heart before he met me. The one whose name would occasionally come up in conversations with his friends, usually with awkward glances and a quick change of subject. I'd always told myself it was ancient history, but that was before she became my next-door neighbor. It all started on a Saturday morning. I was trimming the hedges in our front yard when I noticed a moving truck pull into the driveway next door. Naturally, I was curious. The house had been on the market for months, and I'd been hoping for a nice, quiet family to move in. As I watched a sleek black car pull in behind the truck, a woman stepped out. She was tall, slim, and effortlessly stylish, with long auburn hair and oversized sunglasses. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her right away. Chris came outside to see what the commotion was about, and the second he saw her, his face went pale. "No way," he muttered under his breath. That's when it hit me. This was Rachel. I tried to play it cool. "Is that?" I asked. He nodded, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. "Yeah, that's her." Rachel didn't notice us at first, but eventually, she came over to introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Rachel," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was warm, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes as she glanced at Chris. I shook her hand and introduced myself, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm your name, and this is my husband, Chris." Her smile faltered for a split second, and then she recovered. "Chris, wow. Small world, huh?" Chris gave her a tight smile. "Yeah, really small." The tension was palpable, and after a few more pleasantries, Rachel excused herself to oversee the movers. As soon as she was out of earshot, I turned to Chris. "Did you know she was moving here?" "Of course not," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this is happening." Neither could I. Over the next few weeks, Rachel settled into her new home. To her credit, she wasn't intrusive or overly friendly, but her presence was impossible to ignore. She seemed to be everywhere, jogging past our house in the mornings, chatting with other neighbors during her evening walks, even waving to us as we got in and out of our cars. Chris tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell it was bothering him. He'd get visibly tense whenever she was around, and his usual easygoing demeanor was replaced with a quiet unease. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop overanalyzing everything. Was she trying to get under my skin? Did she still have feelings for Chris? Did he still have feelings for her? I hated how insecure I felt. Chris had never given me a reason to doubt him, but the situation was so bizarre that it was hard not to let my imagination run wild. Things came to a head one afternoon when I was out running errands. I came home to find Rachel sitting on our front porch, chatting with Chris. My stomach twisted. As I walked up, Rachel stood and smiled. "Oh, hey. I was just borrowing some sugar. I ran out while baking, and Chris was kind enough to help me out." "Sugar? Really?" Chris looked uncomfortable, and I could tell he was trying to gauge my reaction. "She just stopped by a minute ago," he said, as if that would make it better. Rachel handed me a container of cookies. "I made extras. I thought you might like some." I accepted them reluctantly, forcing a smile. "Thanks." She left soon after, and the second the door closed, I turned to Chris. "What was that about?" "I don't know," he said, exasperated. "She just showed up out of nowhere. Do you think she's trying to? I don't know, insert herself into our lives." Chris sighed. "I don't think so. Rachel's not like that. She's just being friendly." I wanted to believe him, but something about the whole interaction didn't sit right with me. The real turning point came at a neighborhood barbecue a few weeks later. It was a sunny Saturday, and everyone was in good spirits, until Rachel arrived. She was wearing a sundress that looked like it belonged in a fashion magazine, and every eye seemed to follow her as she made her way through the crowd. Chris and I were sitting with a group of neighbors when Rachel joined us. She greeted everyone warmly, then turned her attention to Chris. "Remember when we went to that barbecue festival in Austin?" she said, laughing. "We must have eaten our weight in ribs." The table fell silent. Chris cleared his throat awkwardly. "Yeah, that was a long time ago." Rachel smiled, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Good times. I felt like an outsider in my own marriage." She was bringing up shared memories that I wasn't a part of, and I hated how effortlessly she seemed to connect with him. That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Chris, I need to know, are you okay with her being here? Because I'm not. He looked genuinely surprised. Of course I'm not okay with it. But what do you want me to do? It's not like I can tell her to move. I just feel like she's, I don't know, testing boundaries. And I don't like how you react when she's around. Chris took my hand. I love you. You're the one I married, the one I chose to spend my life with. Rachel is my past. That's all. I wanted to believe him, and for a while, I did. A few days later, I came home early from work to find Rachel in our backyard. She was talking to Chris, her tone light and playful, but the sight of them together made my blood boil. Is everything okay here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Rachel turned to me, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Oh, I was just admiring your garden. You have such a lovely yard. Chris looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. She just stopped by. I didn't invite her. That's enough, I said firmly. Rachel, I think it's best if you stay on your side of the fence from now on. Her smile faltered. Oh, I didn't mean to overstep. You did, I interrupted. Please respect our space. She left quickly, and I turned to Chris. I can't keep doing this, I said. You need to set some boundaries, or this is going to destroy us. He nodded, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. You're right. I'll talk to her. The following evening, Chris decided to address the issue. I watched him walk across the yard and knock on Rachel's door, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to follow him to make sure he said everything I needed him to say, but I knew this was something he had to handle on his own. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with dishes while sneaking glances out the window. Rachel opened the door with her signature smile, but as Chris began to speak, her expression shifted. Even from a distance, I could tell the conversation was serious. Chris was gesturing firmly, and Rachel's face went from surprise to what looked like annoyance. They talked for about 10 minutes before Chris turned and walked back home. As he came inside, I could see the tension in his shoulders. Well? I asked, trying to sound calm. I told her she needs to keep her distance, he said, his voice steady. I made it clear that while I wish her no harm, our relationship needs to stay strictly neighborly. No uninvited visits, no personal conversations, and definitely no bringing up the past. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And how did she take it? Chris hesitated. She said she understood, but she didn't look happy. I don't think she expected me to set such firm boundaries. I nodded, relieved but still wary. Thank you for doing that. It means a lot to me. Chris wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug. I love you. I don't want you to feel like you're competing with anyone. Rachel is my past, and you're my future. For a while, things seemed to settle down. Rachel stopped dropping by unannounced and kept her interactions with Chris and me limited to polite waves and casual greetings. I started to breathe a little easier, thinking maybe we had turned a corner. But then little things started happening. Subtle, almost imperceptible things that made me question if Rachel was truly respecting the boundaries Chris had set. For example, I'd notice her jogging past our house more frequently, often when Chris was out working in the yard. Once, she even stopped to chat with another neighbor right at the edge of our driveway, glancing over at Chris every so often. There were other instances, too. Like the time she left a bottle of wine on our doorstep with a note that read, "For old friends and good neighbors." Chris assured me he had nothing to do with it and suggested we just throw it away. But it felt like a calculated move, a way for her to remind us that she was still there, still watching. Then came the day I learned something that changed everything. I was chatting with one of our other neighbors, Karen, who loves to keep tabs on everyone in the neighborhood. Karen mentioned in passing that Rachel had been asking a lot of questions about us, about how long we'd been married, what Chris did for work, even where we liked to go on vacation. Why would she need to know all that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Karen shrugged. Who knows? Maybe she's just curious. But it seemed nosy to me. That conversation left me unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was trying to gather information for some reason, and I didn't like it. When I told Chris about it later, he looked equally disturbed. What is she doing? He muttered. I thought she was backing off. I don't know, I said. But I think we need to be careful. She's not acting like someone who's moved on. The final straw came a few weeks later. Chris and I were hosting a small dinner party with some friends, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy in our lives. Everything was going well until Rachel showed up at the door uninvited. She was holding a plate of cookies and wearing a bright smile, acting as if she had every right to be there. I heard you were having a party, she said cheerfully. I thought I'd bring something over. The room went silent. Our friends exchanged awkward glances, clearly sensing the tension. Chris stepped forward, his jaw tight. Rachel, this isn't a good time. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. Oh, I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought. You're intruding, I said, cutting her off. My voice was calm but firm. This is our home, and you weren't invited. Please respect our space. Rachel blinked, clearly caught off guard. She looked at Chris as if expecting him to defend her, but he didn't say a word. Finally, she muttered something about just trying to be friendly and left. The rest of the evening was awkward, but I was proud of how Chris and I had handled the situation. For the first time, I felt like we were truly a team, standing united against whatever Rachel was trying to do. After the night of the dinner party, I felt a shift in my relationship with Chris. We had faced Rachel head-on, and for the first time since she moved in, I didn't feel so alone in dealing with her. Chris had proven that he was as committed to setting boundaries as I was, and it gave me a renewed sense of confidence in our marriage. However, the fallout from that evening lingered. Our friends, who had witnessed the interaction, kept bringing it up whenever we saw them. "What's the deal with your neighbor?" one of them asked during a casual brunch. "She seems intense." I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "She's just overly friendly, I think." But the truth was, Rachel's behavior felt calculated. Every move she made seemed designed to insert herself into our lives, whether it was dropping off unsolicited baked goods or casually bumping into Chris during his morning runs. I couldn't help but wonder if she was testing how far she could push us before we snapped. About a week after the dinner party, I came home to find Rachel standing in our driveway, chatting with a delivery driver. She was gesturing toward our house, and when she saw me pull in, her expression shifted to one of feigned surprise. "Oh, hi," she called out, waving as if she hadn't just been lingering on our property. I got out of the car, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Hi, Rachel. Everything okay?" "Yes, I was just asking the driver about a package," she said, her smile too wide. "It got delivered to the wrong address, but I think it's sorted now." I nodded, not wanting to engage further. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed her gaze lingering on me. It felt invasive, as if she were trying to read my thoughts. That evening, I told Chris about the encounter. He frowned, clearly frustrated. "She has no reason to be in our driveway," he said. "I'll talk to her again if it happens again." Rachel's behavior escalated a few days later. Chris and I were having a quiet evening at home when our doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Rachel standing there, holding a bottle of wine. "Hi," she said brightly. "I thought I'd come by and apologize for the other night. I didn't mean to interrupt your party." Her tone was casual, but there was something about her presence that felt intrusive. I forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Rachel, but it's really not necessary." She glanced past me into the house. "Oh, are you having a quiet night in? Maybe I could join you for a glass of wine." Before I could respond, Chris appeared behind me. "Rachel, now's not a good time," he said firmly. Her smile faltered. "Oh. Of course. I didn't mean to impose." She handed me the wine and left quickly, her heels clicking on the pavement. I closed the door, shaking my head. "This is getting out of hand." Chris sighed. "I think it's time we take this more seriously." The next day, Chris and I sat down to discuss how to handle the situation. "I think we need to document everything," he said. "Just in case this escalates further." I agreed. We started keeping a log of every interaction with Rachel, noting the dates, times, and details of each encounter. It felt strange and a bit over the top, but it gave us a sense of control in a situation that felt increasingly chaotic. I also decided to confide in one of our other neighbors, Karen. She had been living in the neighborhood for years and seemed to know everything about everyone. When I told her about Rachel's behavior, Karen wasn't surprised. "That woman has been asking all sorts of questions about you and Chris," she said. "She even asked if you two were happy in your marriage." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" Karen smiled knowingly. "I told her you're the happiest couple I've ever seen and that Chris is absolutely smitten with you." That seemed to shut her up. I thanked Karen for her support, but her words left me feeling uneasy. Why was Rachel so interested in our marriage? A few days later, Chris came home with news that added another layer to the drama. He had run into an old mutual friend of his and Rachel's, who revealed that Rachel's move to our neighborhood hadn't been as coincidental as we thought. "She knew you lived here," Chris said, his tone grim. "Apparently, she found out through social media and decided to buy the house because it was nearby." I stared at him, stunned. So this wasn't random? She moved here on purpose. Chris nodded. It seems that way. I don't know what her endgame is, but it's starting to feel like she's trying to insert herself into our lives. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Rachel hadn't just moved in next door by chance, she had deliberately chosen to be here. Armed with this new information, Chris and I decided it was time to draw a hard line. Chris drafted an email to Rachel, reiterating the boundaries he had already set in person. He made it clear that while we wished her no ill will, we needed her to respect our space and stop trying to engage with us outside of casual neighborly interactions. The email was polite but firm, and Chris sent it with my full support. For a few days, things were quiet. Rachel didn't stop by or linger in the driveway, and I started to feel a glimmer of hope that the message had gotten through. That hope was shattered one evening when I came home to find Rachel waiting on our front porch. This time, she wasn't smiling. "We need to talk," she said as I approached. I hesitated but decided to hear her out. "What is it, Rachel?" Her voice was tight with emotion. "I don't understand why you're treating me like this. I've done nothing wrong. I just wanted to reconnect with Chris and maybe be friends with you." "Reconnecting is one thing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But showing up uninvited, asking questions about our marriage, and lingering on our property isn't okay. It's invasive." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I miss having Chris in my life." I took a deep breath. "Rachel, Chris has moved on. We both have. I need you to respect that." She nodded silently, then turned and walked away. After Rachel turned and walked away that evening, I stood on the porch for a long moment, letting the tension seep out of me. The encounter had been draining, but it felt like a line had finally been drawn. I hoped Rachel had understood the message and would respect our boundaries moving forward. Chris came home shortly after and immediately noticed my expression. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "She was here," I said, gesturing toward the porch. "She wanted to talk about why we've been avoiding her." Chris sighed heavily. "What did you say?" "I told her the truth," I replied. "That she's been crossing boundaries and that she needs to let us move on." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a tight hug. "Thank you for handling that. I'm sorry you even had to deal with it." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe this would be the end of it. In the weeks that followed, Rachel was noticeably absent from our lives. She no longer lingered on our driveway or jogged past our house at suspiciously convenient times. The bottle of wine she had left behind remained unopened on a shelf, a small but persistent reminder of the ordeal. Chris and I began to settle back into our routine, focusing on each other and rebuilding the sense of normalcy that had been disrupted. We went on date nights, cooked meals together, and even planned a weekend getaway to the mountains. For the first time since Rachel moved in, I felt like we were regaining control of our lives. Then, just as I was starting to believe we'd put everything behind us, Rachel reached out again, this time, through a handwritten letter left in our mailbox. The letter was long and emotional, filled with apologies and justifications for her behavior. She admitted to moving into the neighborhood intentionally after learning that Chris lived here, though she claimed her motives had been innocent. "I just wanted a fresh start," she wrote. "But seeing you two together made me realize how much I've lost. I'm sorry if I overstepped." At the end of the letter, she wrote, "This will be my last attempt to reach out. I hope you can forgive me." I showed the letter to Chris, and we both agreed not to respond. While her words seemed genuine, we didn't want to reopen any channels of communication. It was better to let things fade quietly. For the next few months, Rachel kept her distance. We would occasionally see her in the neighborhood, walking her dog or chatting with other neighbors, but our interactions were limited to polite nods. Chris and I continued to focus on each other and our future. The weekend getaway we had planned turned out to be exactly what we needed. Surrounded by nature, we were able to talk openly about everything that had happened, from Rachel's unsettling behavior to our own feelings and insecurities. "I want you to know," Chris said one evening as we sat by the fire, "that none of this ever made me question us. You're my priority, always." His words were a balm to my frayed nerves, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. About 6 months after Rachel's last letter, we noticed a "for sale" sign in her yard. At first, I didn't believe it. Rachel had made such a calculated effort to move into the neighborhood that the idea of her leaving seemed almost too good to be true. But sure enough, a moving truck arrived a few weeks later, and Rachel was gone. Our new neighbors, a young couple expecting their first child, turned out to be a breath of fresh air. They were warm, friendly, and completely uninterested in anything beyond normal neighborly interactions. Chris and I welcomed them with open arms, relieved to finally close the chapter on Rachel's presence in our lives. Looking back, the entire ordeal with Rachel felt surreal, like something out of a TV drama. It tested our marriage in ways I never could have anticipated, but it also taught us important lessons about communication, boundaries, and trust. I've come to realize that no relationship is immune to outside challenges, but how you handle those challenges defines your strength as a couple. Chris and I faced Rachel's manipulations head-on, and we emerged stronger for it. As for Rachel, I hope she finds peace and closure in her new life, far away from ours. While her actions caused a great deal of stress, I also understand that she was dealing with her own pain and insecurities. Life in our neighborhood has returned to the calm, predictable rhythm we once cherished. Chris and I continue to nurture our relationship, appreciating the quiet moments and the steady foundation we've built together. The experience with Rachel will always be a part of our story, but it's no longer the defining chapter. We've moved on, and for the first time in a long while, it feels like we're finally in control of our narrative again. Love, trust, and resilience carried us through one of the most bizarre and challenging periods of our lives. And for that, I'm grateful every single day.